Hello. Some of my friends asked me to give a presentation about Syria. I hope this presentation will paint a more vivid and realistic picture of Syria, its people, its culture, its history. The name Syria was used first by the ancient Greeks to describe the area on the eastern Mediterranean coast. The word probably comes from Assyria. In the title of the presentation, Before Yesterday, refers to the period from the beginning of history to the beginning of the 19th century. Yesterday refers to the period until the 1960s. This period was called the Renaissance period in Syria's 1950 school books. Today, in the title, refers to the Bas Assad period that is lasting since 60 years. Syria, geographically, is the western part of the Fertile Crescent. The Fertile Crescent includes Mesopotamia in the east. It is limited in the north by the Taurus Mountains and by Arabia in the south. Along the Mediterranean coast, a mountain chain reaching 3,000 meters high with plenty of rain and even snowfall runs all the way from north to south. Three main rivers, Atasi, Orontes, the old Orontes, towards the north, the Litani and Jordan towards the south, and many streams irrigate the land. One of those streams is Barada, which made up Damascus. Several milestones in human history belong to this area. 10,500 BC, Göbekli Tepe. 5,000 BC, the oldest cities still living today, like Damascus, Aleppo, Jericho, Sidon, and Byblos. BC 3000, we see the first states, Egypt and Sumer, which are born. And we see at that time also the first recorded writings. That means the beginning of history. Here we move to 2500 BC. That is still 2000 years before Herodotus. Pyramids are being built in Egypt. New kingdoms, such as Arcadia and Babylonia, are appearing, starting to emerge. Trade routes on land and sea are developing. Gilgamesh epic appears 1500 years before Homer's Iliad. In 1750, Hammurabi established a comprehensive written legal system in Babylon. 1600 BC, Phoenicians invented the first alphabets at Ugarit and Byblos, using 30 letters, thus tremendously simplifying writing. The Greek alphabet is built from this alphabet. 1300 BC, empire grow, Egyptian and Hittite clash for dominance of Syria after the Battle of Kadesh. They signed the first comprehensive treaty in history, with written political and military conditions. With the crushing, yes. Then in the 12th century, the Hittite empire gets crushed. The central state is crushed by the Sea Peoples, as they call them. But the Hittite states continue in southern Anatolia and in Syria until the 17th century. That's 500 years later than the demise of the Hittite empire based in northern Anatolia. Meanwhile, Phoenicians colonized the Mediterranean, reaching Spain, Morocco, and every island in the Mediterranean. Hellenic gods, certainly, but also several thinkers of the archaic Hellenic period are thought to be of Phoenician origin. For example, Herodotus, in his Histories book, Book 1, paragraph 170, defines the great philosopher mathematician Thales as of Phoenician descent. Hebrew kingdoms appear in Palestine circa 1000 BC. The Old Testament in the 17th century BC and later Christianity both originated in the Syria region, and with the Greek culture influenced by the Phoenicians and other ancient Near East civilizations, these are the basis of Western civilization, which therefore is has something they owe to the Syria region. As the Phoenicians colonized the Mediterranean, first the Assyrians and then the new Babylonians unite the Fertile Crescent under one rule. This is the Neo-Babylonian Empire of the 6th century BC, for example, which was then followed by the Persian Empire, by the Persian Achaemenid Empire, circa 550 BC. As one very important thing here, all the people of this Fertile Crescent, Arameans, Phoenicians, Hebrews, Babylonians, Assyrians, spoke close Semitic languages. Under the Babylonian Empire, Arameans were deported en masse to other regions of the Fertile Crescent, and their language and writing spread and became the lingua franca of the whole region. Even the Persian Achaemenids used Aramean as the administrative and written communication language. Aramean remained the common language for all the Persian, for all the region, the Fertile Crescent region, for another 1200 years until the Arab conquest. The Talmud was written in Aramean. Jesus spoke Aramaic. So this is 1200 years where the whole region had one unified culture with the Aramean language. 330 BC, Alexander the Great erupts in the region, initiating an uninterrupted Greco-Roman period of 950 years. In the first Hellenistic period, Syria became the center of the Seleucid Empire, one of the empires left after the death of Alexander the Great. The Roman period began 150 years later. However, the Greek culture had a deeper interaction with the local Aramaic Syriac culture than the Latin culture. Many locals wrote in Greek, and many Greek works were translated into Syriac. The Persians who ruled the eastern part of the region, of the Crescent region, also left free the Syrian culture. Centuries later, Greek culture was translated into Arabic through Syriac translation and then built upon and passed on to Europe. Now let me cite a few examples from this period, important individuals. One of them is Lucian the Syrian. From 2nd century AD, he was born in Samosata near Urfa, in the north part of the Fertile Crescent. He wrote in Greek. He was an Aramean. He spoke Aramean, his mother tongue, but he wrote in Greek. He was a prolific writer, known for some 80 works. He was satirical, cynical about Greek philosophers and Greek mythology. He was the first science fiction writer. His works include, for example, Journey to the Moon, which clearly inspired the 19th century Baron Munchausen story. He also wrote The Apprentice Wizard, who inspired Walt Disney. He was a very unusual free mind for his time. We have a prophet, the prophet Mani. He lived in Babylon 200 AD. He was inspired by a combination of Christianity, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism. He created a unifying religion, Manichaeism, based on a simple concept of good and bad. Mani wrote in Syria. Mani wrote in Syriac, and over time, most Syriac Christians converted to the Manichaean religion. They entered the Christian and Islamic religions only in the 17th century. And we have the big Queen Zenobia, Palmyra Queen, in Arabic, Tadmor, from 240 to 274. She was of Aramaic Syrian origin and started as the regent of a small kingdom under the Roman Empire. Then she turned the kingdom into a serious rival to Rome. In her strongest moment, she ruled the region shown on this map and proclaimed her son emperor. But in the end, she suffered a great defeat at Homs and was brought to Rome and perished there. But her memory remains. The sages and philosophers she hosted at her palace argued that the Greek spirit originated in the Fertile Crescent. She hosted pagans, Christians, Jews, and Manichaeists. The Manichaeists even claimed that Zenobia was one of them. This state was the only large state in Syria founded by a local person. And interestingly, she was a woman. She was a source of pride in post-independent Syria and was represented on the most valuable Syrian banknotes. You can see her bust here. Now we come to 600 AD. The Fertile Crescent was a rich and culturally prominent region. But the natives while they shared the same Aramaic language and culture, they lived in two separate empires, big empires, Byzantium and the Sasan Persian Republic, empire. But these two empires, between 610 and 630, they fought several wars, and these wars really had both of them tired and weakened. That's when the Arabs come in from out of the desert with their new faith, Islam, and within a few years they ended the Sassanid Empire and entered the depths of Anatolia. They besieged Constantinople for decades, built large mosques in the Karaköy area, and the Ayyub district bears the name of an Umayyad commander who was martyred under the walls of Constantinople. The Arabs did not antagonize the mainly Christian population of Syria. On the contrary, they convinced many Christians that they worshipped the same God. Also, the Arabs, when they settled in, were influenced by the local people and mixed with them. The Damascus-based Umayyad Empire spread over a wide area from Spain to India. Now, there is some very special features that I would like to insist on regarding this Islamic empire. The Arabic language was based on a tradition of oral poetry, had a incomplete script and very few written records. The people of the Fertile Crescent were advanced, and they spoke Aramaic languages, which were close to the Arabic language. So they had no difficulty to adopt the Arabic language, and they developed the writing for the Arabic language so that the Quran can be written fully. They also developed the grammar for the Arabic language using the Quran texts as a base. So we had a completely, fully written Arabic language with a well-defined grammar. And later, thanks to the Syriac translation movement, the Arabic vocabulary became very rich. Since the languages, Syriac and Arabic, have the same morphological structure for the words, if you take a word from a root from Syriac, you can construct many Arabic words. So the vocabulary was enriched a lot, and that's how the Arabic language could become a language for to express science, research, philosophy, everything. And we can make this statement that that while it originated in Arabia, the Arabic language was developed in the Fertile Crescent area. And that is probably why the Syrians and the Iraqis are very fond about saying they are Arabic. That means they are the owners of the Arabic language. Now, compared with other empires such as Roman and more specifically the Ottoman Empire, the Arabic language empire was unstable, and soon the central power disintegrated. Very quickly, the Umayyads lasted 90 years until 750, but the Abbasis took over, moved the caliphate to Baghdad, where they had support from the Persians to overcome the Umayyads. And the Persians really entered into the administration, and in less than 100 years they became very powerful overall in the administration. And the Caliph, he brought Turk guards. These guards became later on commanders and then rulers. So we passed from a period with very high Persian influence on the administration to a period of Turkish influence. And by 1950, the Caliph in Baghdad had no military strength, and the whole empire was maybe governed by 15 independent rulers. But there was the unity of the language and the culture, which was overall from Andalus to the east part of Iran. And that's where we come to the third point. From the 17th century Umayyad period to the 13th century in the east and to the 15th century in the west, the Arabic language continued as the language of science, administration, art, literature. Undoubtedly, the Arab-speaking world in this period made a significant contribution to human civilization. That period is an important link in the history of humankind from a cultural point of view. And Syria was at the center of this culture and was a source of tolerance stretching back to Spain. Now, let's have a few examples of art and technology, philosophy in those times. Sufism originated in Aleppo during the Umayyad period, circa 700 AD. And the Samah dance is the forerunner of the Anatolian Mevlevi dance. Let me give you a small show. That was an adaptation in Aleppo in the 20th century, of course. It's interesting that this dancer was a woman. Now Andalusia. Andalusia was conquered by the Umayyad princes, as I said before. Many more enlightened people followed later to Andalus, fleeing the Abbasids. They maintained their cultural ties with Syria and contributed in many ways to Europe's awakening. They created a vibrant, multicultural Arabic language civilization center in Andalusia. Ziryab was a virtuoso musician who fled to Andalusia around 800 AD and created the Muwashah genre. He may be the pioneer of the troubadour music in Europe. This is the beginning of an Andalusian Muwashah circa
في ليال كتمت سر الهوى بالدجى لولا شموس الغرر مال نجم الكأس فيها وهوى مستقيم السير سعد الأثر حين لذ النوم شيئا أو كما هجم هجوم الحرس غارت الشوم بنا أو ربما أثرت فينا عيون النرجس
بالذي أسكر من عزم اللبن كل عذب تحت سيري وحرم والذي أحمل جنبيك بما سجد السهم لديه وقلم والذي أجرى دموعي عندما غامضت من غير سبب فعلى صدري يمناك فما أجدر الماء بإنكار اللبن
يا أهيل الحي من وادي الغدا وبقلبي مسكن أنتم به ضاق عن وجدي بكم رحب الفضا لا أبالي شرقه من غربه أحور المقلب معزول لنا جال في النفس مجال النفس سدد السهم فأسمع إذ رمى بفؤادي نبلة المفترس
زمان الوصل بالأندلسي
يا زمان الوصل
بالأندلسي
We move to mathematics. Harran University, south of Turkey today, was a pioneer in mathematics and astronomy. One of the scholars in the 10th century, Al-Battani, developed spherical trigonometry, how to calculate angles and distances on a sphere. Another anecdote, that's a present from Khalifa Charlemagne to Harun from Khalifa Harun al-Rashid to Charlemagne, King of France. And this is a watch, a water watch, and the French chronicles of the period, they just marveled at this marvel, and they used the words that is wondrously wrought by mechanical art. Philosophy. This is Al-Ghazali. He's seen as a conservative cleric in 1100 AD. He wrote The Contradiction of Philosophers against the Aristotelian system of thought used by Muslim philosophers to discuss religious issues. He argued that faith should come from the heart, not from the mind, and that God's will supersede rational thought. This was quite common among Christian thinkers of the time, but was seen as conservative in Islam. Ghazali, as conservative as he may be, wrote this about jihad. Look, before you start jihad against your enemy, you have to win against 13 sins which in yourself: egoism, arrogance, and so on. You can read it there. Then we have a liberal philosopher, Ibn Arabi. My religion is love. He was a philosopher and a poet. So this is a poem, the part of a poem he wrote, basically stating that no matter what your religion is, even you are, Christian, Jew, or just a non-believer, if you are a human being, you are worth of love. So this is the situation of in the period, of the Arabic Islamic civilization. We are back in 1100, 1200, and so on. Now we move to the Crusades. The Crusades began in 1095. They are seen by the locals as the greatest humanitarian and material disaster in the region's history. In addition to 115 years of fanatical slaughter and destruction, the Crusades established the dominance of warlords in the region. This map shows the Crusader states in 1200 AD, 6 rival states constantly at war with their local neighbors. And to make matters worse, towards the end of the Crusades, the Mongols came and destroyed every major city and committed unimaginable massacres. It was the beginning of a long sleep that lasted until 800. Until 1500, the Egyptian Mamluks fought with the Turkish Beylikler on the land. Then the Ottomans were victorious and united the whole area and ruled undisputedly. Under Ottoman rule, until 1800, the area was quiet, without much wars, but culturally was in a deep decay and sleep. Napoleon's invasion of Egypt and parts of Syria in 1800 ushered a new era in the Middle East. Taking the French Jacobin state as an example, Mehmet Ali, a former Ottoman commander, established a strong and modernized Egyptian state. While he was officially the Ottoman governor of Egypt, he added Syria to his administration and became a new power center in the eastern Mediterranean. He occupied a part of Anatolia and went as far as Kütahya until he was repelled by France and England, who did not want such a powerful state in the region. Western interest in the Levant grew, and the Western countries competed among themselves in establishing educational institutions there in the Levant. Whatever the goal was, this naturally aroused cultural life. The renewal in Egypt, the cultural awakening that came with education in the region, the reform wind in Istanbul, and the increased investment from Istanbul to counter the Western influence in the Levant led to a very positive 19th century in the region, which, as I said earlier, was called Renaissance in the 1950s books. You have learned people. You start seeing poets, writers, and learned people, and the beginning of economic revival. So before I move to the end of the Ottoman Empire, just two pictures. This administrative map of the Ottoman Empire in 1900 shows that Gaziantep, Urfa, Marash, and Aleppo were part of the same province. That tells a lot about that Aleppo was much closer to southern Anatolia than it was to Damascus, because the economic and social relations that happen when you are part of one governorship. Even the representatives to the first Ottoman assembly were separate from those of the Damascus province. In fact, Aleppo was an important trade center between the Mediterranean and Mesopotamia, and between Syria and Anatolia since very ancient times. And it had many industries and crafts and a rich population mix. So that was a very effective and very prosperous governorship. That had also an effect over the region and also over the south. Another picture is the railways. At the beginning of the 20th century, this was the situation about the railways. Besides a railway passing through the Syrian main cities in the inside, you had four lines connecting the inside to the sea, to the coastal cities. That helped a lot, of course, in the development of the region. So, what this means, at the beginning of the 20th century, in 1900, we had a quite relatively developed region in the Ottoman Empire, Syria. You had universities, education, American University of Beirut, founded in 1866, French University, Université Saint-Joseph, and starting faculties of medicine and law in Damascus. I mentioned the railways, quite developed, and obviously the people, thanks to education and universities, they became quite aware of the politics of the West, and of course they looked at the past, and they were very eager about the people to develop the area. And there is in Syria, exactly contrary to what's happening here, there has always been a huge, very, really unique tolerance between the communities. All those communities, actually, they have the same mother tongue, they speak the same language, they have the same habits. And they respect each other's religions. I want to tell one story about how we call them, the bells of Homs. Homs is a central city, third city in Syria, and my grandfather's father, Khalid Effendi, was the mufti of Homs, and he decided that he should let the bells, the Christian bells, play during Sundays and the Christian religious feasts. He did it, but a few months later, the news came to Istanbul, and he was relieved from his job. He was a 25-year mufti from a family of mufti, and that shows actually where was this fundamentalism was coming as a policy from Istanbul. It wasn't coming from the people. Actually, this was not the family, the Ottoman family. It was the policy of the Ottoman Empire. Very developed language, Arabic, that was very good to describe anything, to do science, to do engineering, and so on. And this region had the special privilege of having direct relations, economic relations with the West, as well as inside the Ottoman Empire. So that was really a privileged situation. So with all these good things, what happened starting from 1909? In Turkey, in Istanbul, constitutional monarchy was imposed on Sultan Abdul Hamid. And when he tried to overthrow it, he was deposed in 1909, and a constitutional regime led by the Union and Progress Party began. This regime, which would bring freedom and equality, led in its first 10 years, may be comparable to the French Revolution of 1789, to great human disasters. Furthermore, having lost the war, the Sultan was ready to give up sovereignty to keep his throne. Fortunately, Mustafa Kemal Pasha stepped in, kicking out the foreign invaders, and created a new Turkey. In the Syrian region, as of 1909, refugees began fleeing Anatolia, fleeing from Anatolia, and the cities started filling. But in 1914, Jemal Pasha came to Syria as governor with absolute military and civilian powers. That was really bad news. He implemented an extremely violent policy with a pan-Turkish mentality. He is remembered as the chopper by the locals. Examples: in the autumn of 1914, Jemal Pasha launched a full blockade against Lebanon, probably to prevent people's contact with the West. This, combined with a locust invasion, killed by starvation half of the Lebanese mountain population, and created a huge wave of immigration from the whole region to Latin America and the USA. Among the refugees are ancestors of Carlos Menem, ex-president of Argentina, Mexican tycoon Carlos Slim, Steve Jobs, and many others. In 1915-16, that is a picture of the Great Famine. In 1915-16, Jemal Pasha moved his interest to members of Syria al-Fatat, the Syrian version of the Young Turks. He had them executed in mass in the main squares of Damascus and Beirut. These were not armed rebels. They were educated family children. With the famine blockade, violence, and mass executions, the Syrian people were alienated. Now the people undoubtedly wanted full independence. Emir Faisal, son of Sharif Hussein of Mecca, had lived in the region since 1900. At that time, he was defending an autonomous Syria within the Ottoman Empire, like the local intellectuals of Syria. But after the events which I described, Faisal joined those who demanded Syrian independence and took the leadership of the movement. Upon the British formal promise in 1916 of an independent nation in Syria, Emir Faisal's father, Sharif Hussein of Mecca, declared independence of the Hijaz and entered the war the World War as a Western ally. So that ends the Ottoman period. And so we start the period after the Ottoman Empire. Emir Faisal entered Damascus in October 1918, symbolically with an Arab battalion as Britain's ally. He was greeted as a local with hope and enthusiasm by the public and the elite. Educated, Hashemite noble, and liberal, Faisal was accepted as a unifying figure for a new Syrian state. The news of the Sykes-Picot Agreement and the 1917 Balfour Promise had reached Faisal and the Syrian elite. But they still wanted to believe in Harold Wilson's 14-point doctrine and his proposal to establish a society of nations to end colonialism and help new nations gain independence. Those were Harold Wilson's own words. They hoped that they could gain the upper hand against the colonial lobby and achieve independence with the help of Wilson's principles. The aim was to reach the level of contemporary civilizations, exactly the same terms used by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, who wanted to do that for Turkey. The one difference, they did not have an armed support. Thus, in May 1919, a constituent assembly was elected from all regions of Syria, including Lebanon and Palestine, and the assembly issued a declaration to the world defining the government desired by the Syrian people. I will come in detail to that period. American writer Elizabeth Thompson wrote an impressive book about this period, How the West Betrayed Arab Democracy. By the way, she's a leftist. My cousin Ridwan Atasi wrote from a local perspective about these events in a book called Syria, A Message of Wisdom. The book concentrates on our grandfather Hashim Atasi, who played an influential role in the history of Syria between 1900 and 1960. The book was published in Arabic and French, and I have just received the English script of the book. I am thinking of translating it into Turkish, and if it is deemed appropriate, to print it in Turkey. Let me summarize the events of 1918-1920. So this is Ridwan's book. And now regarding the events. First of all, let me have an English explanation. The British didn't want to look at Faisal as a Syrian politician or the next or any relation with the Syrian people. They looked at him as a Hijazi general who allied with them. And they said simply the future of Syria will be determined at the forthcoming Paris conference. But the Syrian people were totally impatient, and they were, they had actually equal rights with the Turks, and they separated from the Turks because they didn't have their freedom. So here they were absolutely adamant about their future independence. They organized in parties, NGOs, even women organizations were there, and they demanded the sovereignty and the equality of the people based on Wilson's declaration. There was total unity, whether depending from all three regions of Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and Central Syria, people of different religions, sects, and also clergy and secular people. They all marched together asking for the same thing. And as I showed before, they elected a constituent assembly who formally announced to the whole world in writing what they wanted. Now the Paris meeting took place, and the Syrian delegates were left aside, but still with the help of the Syrian diaspora and Wilson, who was still in charge. An A-type light short-term mandate system was presented to Syria. Actually, Syria wanted the United States, or if not, maybe the UK, but they didn't want France to take a mandate because they knew that that they should expect in that case a complete rule by the French. Anyway, so this A mandate proposal would have allowed Syria to govern themselves by themselves. Just whoever is the mandate country would only supervise and advise. And also, a decision was made at the Paris conference is to send a delegation to Syria to evaluate the people's readiness to have their country. Of course, this claim was mostly supported by the Americans, and so this was reasonably good news. But now, unfortunately, there were changes in the West. The French, there was a change of government in France, and the rightist colonialists came to power, and the colonialist lobby managed to have France send an army to Lebanon to mess up things. Britain turned a blind eye because they wanted to have free hands in Iraq. And Lou Wilson lost the midterm elections, and he became a bit of a lame duck. So alarm bells began ringing in Syria, where there were still there was foreign armies around, but the administration was Syrian. So the Syrian Constituent Assembly worked day and night to complete a detailed constitution, and before things get worse, they declared Syria's independence. And I can tell you, you can see in the books I mentioned, there were very interesting debates to get on the constitution points, and the debates were very, very good level, with a very awakened view of politics. And there was a will to compromise and reach solutions which are acceptable to everybody. And the Crane delegation also gave a positive report in favor of Syria, but the report didn't reach the table at the conference. In return, there was aggressivity and accusations, obstructions, an ultimatum, and finally an occupation of Damascus with plenty of bloodshed in August 24, 1920. That was when the French army just crushed the small Syrian whatever, if we call it army, and took over the power in Syria. Complaints were sent. Some people fly to Egypt and other places. Responsible people. One of them was the head of parliament, the last head of parliament, Rashid Rida. But the complaints were not delivered to their destination. And so it ends with the French occupation of Syria. The first action of France was to sever and enlarge Lebanon from Syria and divide Syria into 6 regions according to sectarian and ethnic origin. Palestine was separated and placed under British mandate. Jordan and Iraq were made Hashemite kingdoms governed by Princes Abdullah and Faisal. England wasn't eager, like the French, of administering territories. They just wanted to make sure their interests were protected. So Iraq and Jordan had a better fate than the Syrian people. All parties and communities united against the French in 1925 and rose in revolt. The rebellion was bloodily suppressed in 2 years, but it made France lose credibility. Revolts broke out in Palestine too, but the English had a softer hand. When this is a revolt, a symbol of the revolt, built later after the independence. Well, when the revolt was crushed, immediately a Syrian National Front was founded, and it would continue the struggle in the political arena without any arms. These are the leaders of the National Front. Hashim Atasi was the head of the National Front. These are his friends, which were all there in 1919 at the Constitutional Assembly. The struggle continued, France trying to find and impose collaborators, and the Syrian people rejecting in each time, on every occasion, whenever there were elections or inquiries among the people. So we come to 1936, when a socialist, anti-colonialist French government came to power and signed with the leaders of the National Front the agreement giving independence to Syria. This is their picture signing the agreement in Paris in 1936. However, the French army would remain for a while, and Syria would maintain friendship with France. Afterwards, elections were made in Syria. The treaty was approved, and a government and president came into power. However, the French right came back to power and refused the agreement. This and other actions of the French created complete distrust. The president, Hashim Atasi, and the national government resigned and left the whole thing to France to manage. During World War II, France's position weakened, and it needed local support in Syria. De Gaulle came to Hashim Atasi's house twice, promising that France could return to the 1936 agreement, but now the Syrians wanted full independence. Then France turned violent and bombed Damascus, but the British forced the French out, as these clashes undermined their own strategy in the region. They didn't want another revolt in Syria when that could affect their relationship with the Iraqis or in Palestine. So in 1943, the final treaty was signed, and at the end of the war, the last French soldier left. Of course, now Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon, parts of North Syria were missing from the Syria declared in 1920. Yes. So that's the 36th. Now we have a new, since 1943, when after the signature of the Total Independence Treaty, the leadership of the National Front had aged. You know, they had started the 1919 constitutional parliament was already 24 years old. So they entrusted the power to new politicians. And the country started smoothly until 1948, when there was the Palestine defeat and the street was mixed up. The oil pipeline rivalry between England and the USA, as well as different views on unifying Syria with neighbors, triggered adventurous officers, army officers, to attempt military coup. There were 2 military coups and 2 counter coups, total of 4 coups in 4 years, each recalling Hashim Atasi, the former head of the National Front, as a unifying figure to restore civilian power. So the last time he was recalled to power, he was already 81 years old. Now we come to 1954, when Nasser took fully the reign of power in Egypt. 2 political currents came face to face in Syria, right and left. A liberal right that favors conversions with the West, and a left that favors conversions with the Soviet Union and world socialism in the footsteps of Nasser. Both sides believed that Syria had to be part of a larger nation to achieve stability. The right wanted to establish a parliamentary monarchy with Iraq based on history and geography. Why monarchy? Because they believed the king would symbolize the unity of the nation above the parties, left, right, and so on. In Iraq, there was the young King Faisal, the grandson of Emir Faisal, a liberal and Western friend, like his grandfather. The left, on the other hand, wanted to unite with Nasser's Egypt in the name of Arab nationalism. The army, on the other hand, were influenced by Nasser's charisma and nationalist rhetoric in Egypt and chose rather the left party side. Most interestingly, the West, on the other hand, did not want a strong and democratic country sitting on large oil reserves, even if it is friendly to the West. And Israel didn't want it either. Although they didn't like Nasser, they did not support the Syria-Iraq unity project at all. What about life in Syria in those years? Although the political situation in this period was not stable, as we mentioned, in 10 years there were 4 coups, but these were just above. The economy went well, and some progress was made on the social side. In 1950, a libertarian constitution, including women's right to vote, came into effect. There were also plenty of debates on social reforms. Right and left, you know, they affected each other, and they affected the society. Private investment increased until 1956, and the per capita income of Syria was considerably higher than that of Turkey. A rare occasion in the Arab world, in this atmosphere, 82-year-old Hashim Atasi, who had been defending Syria's independence and then the democratic regime under difficult conditions since 1919, completed his last duty and handed over the presidency in September 1955. Also a nostalgic parenthesis before we come to the catastrophic events that followed. Here in 1955, the young Iraqi king visited the Syrian president. The leader's dream was a unified, modern, fertile crescent. But the opposite happened. In summer 56, Nasser nationalizes the Suez Canal. Very good step. But in a 19th century colonial style, France, England, and Israel, without much negotiation, attacked simultaneously Egypt and took control of the Suez Canal and Sinai Peninsula. However, the Soviet Union threatened with nuclear weapons, and the three countries were summoned by the USA to leave with no conditions. Nasser became the defeater of the old colonialists and gained tremendous popularity in the Middle East. Egyptian radio, heroic films, songs celebrated the new great world power. Any Arab non-believer would be seen as a traitor to the cause. And indeed, in Syria, heads of the first party in parliament who were still advocating rapprochement with Iraq were arrested 3 months after the Suez crisis and tried by a military court for conspiring with Iraq. Syria came under de facto military rule behind a civilian government. The son of Hashim Atasi, my father, who was on trial, stayed in prison until 1960, then he was exiled. The young King Faisal was killed in a military coup in Iraq in 1958. The only preserved Hashemite kingdom in the region to date is Jordan, because it is a small and resourceless country, and the people of Jordan are the most comfortable and prosperous people in the Syrian region today. In February 58, Syria became part of the United Arab Republic, entirely under Egypt's rule. Not a single embassy or ministry was left in Syria. The unity that was formed in a haste never worked. People didn't warm to each other. It ended in September 61, when the officers in Syria announced that Syria had separated from Egypt. Free elections were held in Syria, and the same parties as in the 50s came to parliament. Those on trial in 1956-7 and exiled demanded that their suit be reopened in civil court. Instead, the Baas coup came. The Baas coup. And we came into the new today. I think. I have it in English. In the 1963 Constitution, the Baas was declared the leading party in the new Constitution. Parties other than quote-unquote progressist parties were banned. The power struggle was now taking place between army generals, and the coup were getting bloody in the streets. Previous coup, the ones we mentioned in the early 50s, they were just office changes. Finally, in September 1970, Hafiz Assad came to power. The last Baas party leader and civilian president, left-wing cousin Noordin Atasi, stayed the rest of his life in prison while the other party founders were in exile. To ensure his power, Hafiz appointed reliable people of his Alevi lineage, representing 12% of the population, to head all key positions in the army and law enforcement agencies. Any opposition was brutally punished. People were taken in for minor suspicions and disappeared. The economy was in the hands of Assad's clan. Businessmen could only do business after serious, security screening, and if they got a partner from the Assad clan. Interestingly, this type of system does not immediately collapse the economy because new people are getting richer and previous investors are collaborating in order to try to save their investments. And also, Lebanon came to help. How is that? After the 1967 war, the PLO was pushed from the West Bank to Jordan. There they became a heavy burden to the Jordanian kingdom due to their anti-Israeli activities and Israeli punitive attacks. They eventually clashed with the Jordanian army and were pushed into Lebanon in 1970. The same story started in Lebanon, but as the central government is weak in Lebanon, the business was between the PLO and the newly strengthened local militias. In 1975, the PLO clashed with the Maronite militia. With external incitement, the Muslim militias took the side of the PLO, and in 1976, the Christian militia, the Maronite militia, was cornered. Assad entered Lebanon as the protector of the Maronites upon their invitation, and the West accepted the situation for a while. Lebanon became under Assad's hand. Lebanon had been the business and banking center of the Middle East until 1975 and had amassed great riches. While Assad ruled Lebanon, the wealth to share with his clan increased. Corruption increased. Also, many well-to-do Lebanese took refuge in Syria. But meanwhile, there is not a iota of freedom in Syria. The people could gather and express their discontent only on Fridays in mosques. This situation was exploited by the Islamists, who launched Wahhabi-trained terror against regime representatives. Regime responses were also horrific, as was the 1982 bombing of Hama, which killed up to 30,000 people. In 1980, Israel entered Lebanon to destroy the Arafat organization, Fatah. Hafez retreated into the Bekaa Valley and seriously supported Hezbollah, who made it too expensive for Israel to stay. After too many casualties, Israel left, followed by the French and Americans, who also had their agendas. Eventually, Assad received a formal mandate from the Arab League to appease Lebanon and remained Lord of Lebanon until his death in 2000. He even joined the US coalition against Iraq in 1991. Hafiz Assad played his hand very cleverly. But in 30 years, the regime cynicism and brutality corrupted people's minds. And the economy started declining in his last years because the economic management of Lebanon was now passing to the Lebanese prime minister. That's, one condition. That was one condition why for the Arab League to give him power in Lebanon. In 2000, after the death of his father, Bashar Assad succeeded his father, ophthalmologist by profession and married to a Syrian girl who grew up in England. Bashar's rule began with the hope of a Damascus Spring. Westerners tried to soften the regime. A few public meetings were allowed. But the issue was not just the control of political power by Assad, but it was the control of lawlessness and corruption. So it wasn't possible to advance. Everything closed again, and the spring ended. In 2005, Lebanese Prime Minister Hariri, Prime Minister, who was trying to take full control of Lebanon, was blown up spectacularly. Hariri was a personal friend of Western leaders and the Saudi kingdom. The Syrian regime was believed to be the organizer, and so they lost their acceptance in the West and were driven out of Lebanon with the threat of military intervention. Economy continued to deteriorate. The Arab Spring broke out in 2011. It gave hope to the Syrian elite. It was hoped that the 1920 and 1950 pluralist constitutions would return and that Assad would leave like Mubarak in Egypt and Shadli in Tunisia. But the Syrian regime was much more deeply ingrained. The learned elite was outside the country, and only Islamists were left on the ground. In a matter of months, the revolution was no longer about demanding democracy. It became an armed conflict between foreign-funded Islamists and a reckless regime. This suited the regime, who was ready to destroy the whole country to stay in power. The people paid a great price for this. As I will show you in these slides, the regime bears primary responsibility. Let's look at the slides. These are the scenes of bombarded cities. The devastation is certainly not made by terrorists. You need bombs and missiles dropped from, from aircraft to do that. Even Scud missiles were used. This is a Scud hit in Aleppo. Also, the destruction never happened in the cities under the control of the government, such as Damascus and Latakia. Of course, there has been some effects, but not this type of destruction. This is another creation of the Syrian regime, dropping these kinds of barrels filled with metal and explosives from helicopters, and they just drop them on buildings. Chemical attacks. There hasn't been many, but the purpose of a chemical attack is not military. Is to frighten the people. Let me see. I know I don't have it in English. So this is one on the 31st of August 2013, in the middle of the night, 2:30, in two different areas outside Damascus in the suburbs. They are separate 16 kilometers from each other, and almost at the same time, and they are inhabited by the families of by the whatever we call them, the terrorists and their families, and the missiles fall there, and about 1,000 persons are dead. And there was a United Nations commission which came, but with a limited scope. They could only make technical research and remarks, but certainly not name who did it. But whether it's the ballistics or the chemical used, the used projectile, and so on, they point to the regime and Russia. But it was never stated that officially by the United Nations that they did it. And I believe that the purpose was to frighten and get the people from Damascus neighborhoods to go to leave the area and go to places, where they are now, where in Idlib, near Turkey. And then there is the torture and disappearance of people there are 14,537 documented cases, documented with names, pictures, and dates and locations of people who died under torture. Who did it? Well, everybody did it. The Syrian regime, but also all the other major, the ISIS did it, the SDF, now mainly PYD, the Kurdish, the army supported by Turkey, and Tahrir al-Sham, and so on. Everybody did it. But of course, the regime as a state documents much more. So the documented cases are crushingly made by the regime. If we move to the number of disappearances, we know who they are and where they disappear, but we don't have a documented case for each one of them. Then the numbers increase. Again, the Syrian government comes first, but also the other parties, also they have thousands of people that disappears under their custody. Everyone. So everyone made terrible crimes. So the result of all this is really that Syria lost its sovereignty on the land. The people, about 1/3 of the people have emigrated from Syria, and many more people have changed their homes. They have moved to other places in Syria. And the two main powers, Russia and America, share actually the control over the state. No more sovereignty. Now, the question, are the Syrians foreign in Turkey? The history shows that, they share the same history with Anatolia, very, very much, very, very close. Are their genes so different? I mean, are they different people? Well, if you look at this map, genetic map of Europe, you notice that, you have here, you have different groups, and here this is one group of countries where there are small differences. The dark green are the Semites. There are more Semites in Syria than in Turkey. The black, interestingly, the black thing here is Caucasus origin, and that there is more in Turkey than in Syria. The rest are similar, very close, and the central Turkey part is very small in both countries. So there aren't much genetic differences. Music, art, and kitchen are very, very close. And if you look at southern Turkey, it's just the same. Religion is the same. The language, very much intermixed. It's not only religion and Quran. And actually, if you in all fields, technical fields, medical, legal, administration, use a lot of Arabic in Turkish, in the Turkish language, even though the origin of the language is different, the construction of the language is completely different. But I mean, the two languages are close today in terms of vocabulary. Are the Syrians coming to Turkey because of economic reasons? Historically, the Algerians have been traveling, now all the Africans are coming to Europe and so on. This is a Medicine Project database source comparing the purchasing power of the two countries, where, before 1950, you have few points. And you see here that in the 50s, as I was mentioning at one time, up to 56, the income per capita was quite maybe almost double in Syria. And then there is the Lebanese crisis, which benefited Syria. But after 1995, Syria just went down. and completely crushed if we go down till today. So, actually, it is not for economy, it's because of the lack of security. I've been here since 1988. There wasn't there were very few Syrians in Istanbul at the time, and nobody from my family. And today, there is an association in Istanbul, the Atasi Association. It numbers 550 members, and they have a location, and they are very active. So all these people came after 2010, and in general, Syrian people have not migrated to Turkey in the past 100 years before 2010, while there have been migrations from Turkey. In 1910, the Christians of Turkey came in mass to Syria, and after the 20s, the Kurds came from Turkey to Syria several times. Massive movements. So, is there any difference? Surely there is a difference in the collective culture. Turkish community culture, national culture, is about conquest and empire's foundation, and then strong nationalism since Atatürk. What about the Syrians? Syria community culture is different. Except for Zenobia, no native ever united it. In 1920, the nationalistic elites wanted and could have created a modern nation, but this was not allowed, and they didn't have the power to impose it. However, Syria raised profits and affected the world by exporting valuable immigrants to the whole world. Phoenicians migrated everywhere to the Mediterranean, and they awakened the Mediterranean. The Arameans were exiled to Babylon, and their language became the lingua franca of the whole Fertile Crescent for 1200 years. The Hebrews were exiled to Babylon and then into the world, creating great wealth and lobbies of great power today. After the Umayyad, all the oppressed under the Abbasi migrated to Spain. They woke up Europe, really, literally. The immigrated, also the Syrians immigrated to the Americas in the 1910s and made significant contributions. Now, newly, they are migrating since 2010. Now, I leave you with a poem from a Lebanese immigrant, Khalil Gibran, and you will see his poem and hear the song which was sung by a Lebanese singer, Fairuz. And thank you, and bye-bye.
اتخذت الغاب مثلي منزلا دون القصور فتتبعت السواقي وتسلقت الصخور هل اتخذت الغاب مثلي منزلا دون القصور فتتبعت السواقي وتسلقت الصخور